So I wanted to get your comment on this. Here's Nikki Haley. Here's exactly what we've been talking about, and here's what she's talking. Here's her big idea to fight anti-Semitism.
When I get into office, the first thing we have to do, social media accounts, social media companies, they have to show America their algorithms. Let us see why they're pushing what they're pushing. The second thing is every person on social media should be verified by their name. That's, first of all, it's a national security threat. When you do that, all of a sudden people have to stand by what they say, and it gets rid of the Russian bots, the Iranian bots, and the Chinese bots.
What it actually does is it takes away needed anonymity from people in those countries who want to actually protest their governments. And so now they can't, because now they'll be exposed and their police will go get them, including in the United States. What do you say to that, Glenn?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, there are a lot of people in the United States who have lost their jobs. I mean, we talked about the people who have lost their jobs in the last 5 weeks for criticizing Israel. But before that, for years, people who were dissidents to establishment orthodoxies on COVID, on the war in Ukraine, on January 6th, on the 2020 election, have lost their jobs en masse as well. And when you create a climate in which people get punished for expressing their political views, anonymity becomes crucial. The ability to speak anonymously is a centerpiece of First Amendment rights. Do you know, Jimmy, there are 6 or 7 Supreme Court cases, all of which have nullified laws like the kind Nikki Haley wants, where cities have tried to say if you're going to distribute flyers or pamphlets of a political nature, you're required to put your name on them. And then people would hand out flyers in the name of a group that didn't have any name, and they would fine them or prosecute them. And the Supreme Court in every case said, no, these laws are unconstitutional because the right to speak with pseudonyms or the right to speak anonymously is a vital and indispensable right if free speech is to matter. Otherwise, the only free speech you'll have is to express views that comport with establishment orthodoxy. It's so ironic, and I know Nikki Haley doesn't know this, but the Federalist Papers, the foundational documents that led to the enactment of the Constitution, were written by people like Alexander Hamilton using a pseudonym. Mark Twain wrote under a pseudonym. There have been people writing anonymously for all of Western civilization. And one of the main reasons is because they often are endangered by authorities if they speak critically about those in power. The only kind of person who would ever say that you have to register on the internet, have your name verified, can't speak anonymously, is a complete authoritarian. And the fact that she can even say that in the face of decades of Supreme Court precedent saying this is what despots do, just shows exactly what she is. But I think Nikki Haley's candidacy is very important because the Republican establishment thought DeSantis maybe had a chance to defeat Trump. I think they've seen he's a weak candidate on the campaign trail. They're now putting all their hopes in Nikki Haley. And if Nikki Haley becomes the Republican nominee, and I don't think she will because the Republican base hates her, but she's going to have more money than AIPAC has behind it, then what you're going to have on the ballot in 2024 is essentially identical foreign policies and a lot of overlap and similarity when it comes to domestic policy as well, which is exactly what the establishment wants. 2 candidates who agree on war. Nikki Haley was a gigantic vocal booster of the war in Ukraine. She supports President Biden's policy of encircling China militarily, as he's done. She obviously has said no difference, not an inch of space between us and Israel. We give Israel whatever it wants, no questions asked, which is Biden's position and always has been. So they're trying to make sure that, yeah, you get to go and vote and like engage in the ritual of voting, but the more similar the 2 candidates are, the less that matters. It just becomes an empty gesture. And Nikki Haley is there to take back the Republican Party from Trump, reinstall the establishment power inside the Republican Party, and ensure there's no choice.
So in the 5 minutes we have left, I want you to speak to what's happened. It happened in what the billionaire class is doing now is so they have narrative control, and when someone breaks through that narrative control, they then criminalize them. That's what January 6th was about. That was a setup with FBI plants in the crowd pushing. They said that, I had Cornel West on my show, and he said that Joe Biden is not a fascist, but Trump is, because Trump tried to overthrow the peaceful transfer of power by overthrowing the government on January 6th. And I had to point out to him that, really, you think a bunch of Second Amendment gun nuts showed up to overthrow the government and son of a bitch, they forgot their guns. Joey, didn't you bring the guns? I brought the mittens. What are you? You were supposed to bring the guns.
People think they brought guns.
They didn't bring guns. So that's another thing I have to explain in comedy club green rooms across the country. And people are shocked when I bring up that point, and it actually makes them think. And so I also brought up to Cornel West on my show that the same RICO statute, which was invented to go after the mafia, they're now using against the number one political opponent of the establishment, which is Donald Trump. And they're using the same RICO statute and the same, in fact, grand jury that went after Donald Trump to go after protesters against the expansion of the police state, which is Stop Cop City. Now, Cornel West pretended to not be able to see that connection. Luckily, I'm a pothead jagoff comedian. I'm not as dumb as a Harvard professor, and I didn't spend 45 years in an ivory tower. I spent 45 years banging my head against a blue-collar wall. So I'm much more in touch with people than he is, and I can see those connections. So anybody who goes against the establishment, they're going to criminalize now, like they did to Lula. They did it in Brazil. They put him in prison because they thought the center-right guy was going to win. Then son of a bitch, Bolsonaro won, their version of Trump. So they had to let Lula back out of prison because he's the only one who could beat Bolsonaro. And now they're criminalizing Bolsonaro, so he can't run. They did it in Pakistan. They're doing it to Trump. They'll do it to anybody. They would do it to Bernie Sanders if he had a nutsack and stood up against the establishment. They'll do it to Cornel West if he actually is a threat to the establishment, but he never will be because he is them. So can you talk to that and why don't you think more people are screaming about that?
Well, I mean, it is so ironic. The people who have been depicting themselves as the saviors of American democracy, the only people standing between us and tyranny, are the same people who are now trying to imprison the leading presidential candidate and talking openly about the fact that Americans don't seem to care that he's been indicted in 4 jurisdictions because they no longer trust our political system or our Justice Department, nor should they, because they know how politicized it is. They watched 4 years of this insane CIA-driven conspiracy theory where the Justice Department tried to prove Trump was blackmailed by Vladimir Putin with sex tapes and he was in bed with the Russians in the Kremlin. It went nowhere. Bob Mueller closed his investigation, said we can't find any evidence this is true. All of this has eroded faith and trust in the Justice Department for good reason. And it is so amazing that now that you see Trump opening his lead on Biden in key swing states, the more you indict him, the stronger he gets. They're now saying our last hope is that maybe he'll be convicted and imprisoned. And then that'll finally start making Americans abandon him. They're openly admitting it's a campaign ploy. So we have a country. I saw this amazing segment the other day where Caitlin Collins was talking to Maggie Haberman. And they were talking about all the incredibly dangerous things Trump supposedly plans to do in 2025 if he wins again. And one of them is, Jimmy, he's going to unleash his Justice Department against his political enemies. Oh my God, what would that be like? I can't imagine living in a country where that happens. They're the ones who are cheering that he's now being indicted. You know, let me just tell you this quick story. One of the things that really turned me against the Obama administration early on was one of my focal points when I started writing about politics was these extreme post 9/11 reactions in the name of the war on terror from George Bush and Dick Cheney and the neocons. One of which was torture, another of which was kidnapping people off the streets of Italy to send to torture chambers. And these are illegal. Torture is illegal. The United States has prosecuted people, including Americans, for using the very interrogation techniques they were using on helpless detainees. And when Obama was running, they asked him, they said, are you open to the possibility that your Justice Department will criminally investigate, and if necessary, prosecute the people responsible? George Bush, Dick Cheney, Condoleezza Rice, John Ashcroft, all the people who did it, Paul Wolfowitz, John Yoo. And Obama said, yes, absolutely. No one's above the law. And then the minute he gets into office after he wins, within like a month, Rahm Emanuel starts telling everybody who will listen, we're not going to prosecute anybody. And then 2 months later, Obama announced a complete and full-scale retroactive amnesty for everyone in the CIA, everyone in the Bush administration who broke the law. And the consensus at the time was, in all of the media, we don't prosecute former presidents. That's only what banana republics do. Maybe if a president committed a really grave crime like a murder or rape or embezzlement, then yes, of course, you don't let them, but you don't prosecute them for political crimes. That was the argument. I wrote a book against this. So if I really believed that they were now finally abandoning this kind of immunity for political elites, I would also be applauding. But I know that's not the case. Look at the things Donald Trump's accused of doing. None of it is the kind of thing we think about as crimes. They have to stretch these statutes beyond all credulity and precedent to try and convert things into a felony. And the American people recognize that. And I know full well this doesn't mean that from now on, Democrats or other standard Republicans are going to be prosecuted when they violate the law. It's a one-time only thing for Trump. And I think the American people see through it, which is why the person who was indicted on felony charges in 4 separate jurisdictions, twice by liberal prosecutors, twice by the Biden Justice Department, is leading the polls. Imagine what that says about the low credibility and esteem in which the American population views our leading institutions of authority, and rightfully so.
Did you ever read Henry Kissinger's Real Politic, where he explains like it doesn't matter the morals? That's like when they go the adults in the room, that's the people who don't consider that. It's did it work or not? That's really how you get judged in history. That's Real Politic doing that. Utter hypocrisy. Doesn't matter how many people get killed. It's just the great game.
Now, Glenn, when I was in Covina on Sunday night doing another one of my sold-out performances to a standing ovation, I asked that crowd if I should go back to dyeing my hair. And as I look at your hair, I'm admiring your dye job. It looks beautiful.
Okay, that is bullshit, Jimmy Dore. Let me just tell you, I will not tolerate that kind of slander in life. There has never been a tiny drop of hair dye in my hair. I'm sorry that you're so envious of the fact that my hair just doesn't gray no matter how much I age. This is my natural hair color. I will take you to court to prove that. Yes, I'm so sorry.
That is amazing.
That you're so bitter about that, but that's just the truth.
All right, I'll take your word on that. I didn't know a 67-year-old man.
You're going to have to, or I will sue you, and we will have some sort of like hair dye analyst to come in and testify that there's just a little bit of tiny gray, very distinguished on the side of my hair, but that just genetically I was the winner and my hair is not graying. So you tell your fucking sold out crowd the next time that you're graying and aging and that I'm not, because that's the truth.
Well, I think they'll be just as surprised as I am that a 67-year-old man like yourself does not have gray hair.
How dare you?
That is just unbelievable, but good for you. Do you think?
Thank you, Jimmy.
Okay. Well, listen, thanks for spending time with us, and thanks for showing off your hair and your big smart brain. I appreciate you coming on as always, and I appreciate you ducking me when you come to the United States. He comes to the United States, Kurt. He doesn't call me.
Really?
Yeah, it happens.
You're all the way on that ridiculous coast on the whole other side of the country. I don't bother with that coast.
Okay, well,
but if I do ever get there, I will definitely give you a call. It is weird that we've never met. Personally, it's always strange to.
No, we did meet.
Like
we met in Vancouver.
So well.
We met in Vancouver.
Oh yeah, we met in Vancouver. That is true. Yeah, that was such a weird thing. You were like in the back and like acting like you were part of a journalist at a press conference, raising your hand at a press
Can I ask a question?
Like, is that fucking Jimmy Dore, part of the Canadian like press corps, asking me questions? And it was.
This coast is nicer now. They're cleaning it up for the Chinese president to see it.
and grayer, much grayer as well.
Much grayer.
All right, guys, thank you so much. It's great talking to you.
Okay, everybody check out Glenn's show, System Update, 7 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, every weeknight at 7 p.m. Thanks, Glenn. Talk to you later. Hey, come see us doing a live stand-up show. We'll be in Burbank, California, Oxnard, California, Venice, California, Palmdale, California. Then we're going to Omaha, Des Moines, Milwaukee, Lansing, Bend, Oregon, Portland, Oregon, Seattle, and Boston, Massachusetts. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all those tickets.